Please turn to page 87 of the Instruction Booklet.
And welcome to episode 5. We finally made it. I am your host, the guy who, does his best to try and keep things straight. And, Jeremy. And I'm joined by a guy who is really good at deciphering the difference between a squirrel and bananas. And that is my perpetual co-host, Michael.
Yeah, I just had a CAPTCHA thing that I had to fill out for some authentication thing on a library website, and it asked me to click to differentiate between pictures of squirrels and pictures of bananas. It's the most bizarre, fried postmodern meme thing that I've ever seen on a login.
Yeah, because clearly artificial intelligence can't tell the difference between a rainbow-colored squirrel and 3 bananas.
Right. They could have made the squirrel yellow at least, but it's literally a rainbow-colored squirrel. I don't understand.
Yeah. Anyway, it was just it was the best thing I could come up with. But hey, we made it 5 episodes. We reached our goal.
We did. Yeah. Sorry, this one's a little bit late. My life's been hectic recently, but we are here.
Yeah, we made it. What's been up to lately, Michael, other than the hecticness? What kind of things have you been playing? Games you've been, movies, books?
My semester just started again at university, so I'm teaching, and I'm also working on getting started on my dissertation, which is cool. And I have been playing a game recently. Well, so Baldur's Gate 3, right? Let's get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah, the big D20 elephant.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, what can be said about it at this point that hasn't already been said by pretty much everyone on the internet at this point? It's just genuinely one of the best games I think I've ever played.
I might get around to it at some point.
Yeah, it created problems for me early last month because I had to work on my prospectus, but I got the Baldur's Gate 3 bug really bad, and I just, when you have a great game that you just get into and you stay up till 2 a.m. playing because you don't want to stop, and then you go to bed thinking the first thing about how excited you are to just wake up and keep playing this game.
I mean, have you ever reached the point where you play a game so much you start dreaming about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I used to dream about the Dragon Ball Fighters combos.
The worst one for me was when I got Dead Space. I played the first Dead Space so much that I would have waking nightmares, and so I had to tell my roommate at the time to be like, "Look, if it's past 11 o'clock, tell me to stop playing this game."
Yep. That's funny. But also, I've been playing this game called Palia recently, which is a it's if a Harvest Moon or a Stardew Valley was an MMO. It's still in closed beta right now, but I signed up for it after seeing a cool ad for it. And it's a surprisingly well-polished and relaxing game that you can kind of just lose yourself in. I'm somebody who, whenever I play an MMO these days, whether it be World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, I tend to just get really lost in professions, cooking and crafting and doing the kind of stuff that would normally be relegated to side content.
Yeah.
I just find it relaxing, and I can kind of turn my brain off for a little bit and just bake cakes. And this game does that really well in a very just comfortable and wholesome online community. I haven't seen any toxicity in the community yet, which is really cool.
I think it would be kind of hard to be toxic in a Animal Crossing game, but I'm sure somebody has a way.
Yeah. Gamers find a way to be toxic sometimes.
Yeah. What do you
Like
mean?
fun
Filled
for
their house full of washing machines and they can't escape?
Yeah. There was one flow tree that spawned in the entire map and you cleared it before telling anyone else.
What
kind of stuff.
What a jerk.
Yeah, what a jerk. Anyway, what have you been playing?
For me, it's been a lot of Street Fighter 6. And I bought Bleak Sword DX recently. I've been playing it. It's been a lot of fun. It's like little Souls like, because it's got this neat little like 8-bit aesthetic with these like very intricately detailed, like they're almost like these little squares. They're just like clips of a scene and you're like playing them out, and it's been fun. I've through like the first 4 levels of it so far, and then I've been playing Street Fighter with some friends, and then I got back into playing some more Slay the Spire because I was like, I'm going to get all of my character classes to like Ascension 20, so
Nice.
that's just been that. And then I went and saw Oppenheimer finally.
It's so good.
It was fantastic. I was surprised that on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the movie came out, the theater was still packed. So yeah, that was great. I've been enjoying that. And then TV wise, Fiona and Cake just started, so I watched like the first episode of that and been watching like What We Do in the Shadows and
Nice.
the new Futurama. It's been fun. But yeah, outside of that, it's just it's the semester's starting here, and so all the college kids are back, and I'm just swamped with like all these things that I'm working on for all the different departments on campus. So it's always a good time. But yeah, so today for our landmark 5th episode that we were finally glad we made it to, we're going to be talking about the video game crash of 1977. Not the one that everybody knows about. That's the other one. We'll get to it at some point. But it was also known as the Forgotten Crash. It was one of the first times the video game industry actually crashed. It's mostly attributed to market saturation, and there was also some lawsuits involved. It's like a weird hodgepodge of a crash, kind of. And we're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about it today because we feel as though it's pretty important for things to come.
It's an important marker in the history of the video game industry because it's like the first moment where I think reality catches up to speculation. And this kind of foreshadows later difficulties that the video game industry would have.
Yeah. It's also kind of the thing that bookends like the 70s with video games. And before we like really get a chance to jump into the 80s, this is kind of like this little this pothole that's in the middle of the road of this video game industry that was like, moving full steam. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to go over some of the different facets of the things that caused this crash, some of the effects, and then we're going to talk about like how it kind of recovered and some of the lessons that could be learned from it that maybe weren't really learned to cause the next big crash. So, but yeah, so in April of 1974, Magnavox filed a lawsuit against Atari, Allied Leisures, Ball Midway, and Chicago Dynamics. Magnavox argued that Atari had infringed on Sanderson Associates' patents related to the concept of the electronic ping pong based on detailed records Ralph Baer kept on the Odyssey's design processing date back to 1966. Other documents were included in the deposition from witnesses and signed a guest book that demonstrated Bushnell had played the Odyssey's table tennis game prior to the release of Pong. So
it's looking at this lawsuit. So first of all, the reason that we're mentioning this lawsuit, I want to say, is not necessarily because this lawsuit causes anything that has to do with the 77 crash, but that this is kind of an early hint as to what direction the game industry is headed in during the 70s and how there's a lot of copycats.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. But one of the funny things to come out of this lawsuit, which I think from a modern context seems a little bit ridiculous, Ralph Baer and Magnavox were basically suing companies for infringing on a patent that frankly has a very broad definition. And I actually have a short article here that was written by Ralph Baer where he talks about the simple definition of the patent itself, and I can read it so you guys can basically hear what it was. Quote, "The lawsuits were mainly about infringing on those claims in our patents that dealt with the interaction between machine-controlled and manually controlled symbols on a screen. If there was a change in the path, direction, or velocity of the machine-controlled symbol immediately after contacting, that is, coming into coincidence with one of the manually controlled symbols on screen, then the game exhibiting these functions infringed on our patents." That's the definition. And if it sounds ridiculously broad and like it possibly could include like many different kinds of video games, then you would be correct.
Oh yeah. They threw a wide net.
If you're controlling a thing on the screen that touches other things and causes them to change direction or speed up, you were infringing on Magnavox's patent, basically.
Man, it makes me almost think of like, you could even argue like a command prompt window would be something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many. I can think of so many modern video games, like every sports game you've ever played.
Mm-hmm. Any flight simulator or simulator period.
Yeah, fighting games.
We're suing these people because they made a farming simulator.
Yeah,
like, yeah, that patent is so broad and wide, just because like. But I guess, like, you would think about, like, in the time, they probably tried to use as broad of terms as possible so they could encapsulate anything that they would think would match ping pong or Pong.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is, like, the weird Inception moment where everything's just Pong.
Everything is just Pong. All video games are just derivatives of Pong.
Yeah.
But you know what's crazy is it worked. Right? The lawsuit... I mean, aside from Atari, do you want to get more into that?
Yeah. Well, I can talk a little bit about, like, because, like, so after this and after considering his options, so Bushnell decided to settle with Magnavox out of court in June of '76. Bushnell's lawyers felt like they could win. However, the estimated legal cost in '76 was $1.5 million, which would have exceeded Atari's funds. Magnavox offered Atari an agreement to become a licensee for the $1.5 million, payable in 8 installments. In addition, Magnavox obtained full information on Atari's products publicly announced or released over the next year. Magnavox continued to pursue legal action against other companies, and proceedings began shortly after Atari's settlement. The first case took place at the District Court of Chicago with Judge John Grady presiding, and Magnavox won the suit against the remaining defendants. So, you know, you think about like $1.5 million in 1976 is a lot of money. Like, that's a stupid amount of money in today's terms.
Yeah.
And Atari was like, oh yeah, well, we think we can win this, but they also would have went broke.
And then Magnavox won in their suits against everybody else.
Yeah. Like, that would have been like Allied Leisures, Midway, and Chicago Dynamics. And you would have thought that like those other people would have just been like, oh, Atari backed out, we should probably back out too. But
yeah. So I guess the historical context of this is that the video game industry in the 70s is an industry in which one company can kind of sue like tons of other companies for making rip-off games. I mean, even as broad as that patent is, the fact that there's any doubt at all, I guess, is maybe just a testament to how homogenous a lot of the early home video game industry looks, especially in the mid 70s.
Yeah. Oh, and you could also like there's a weird theme that kind of runs through this whole crash that like we'll kind of touch on a little bit, but it's also, if you think about some of our previous episodes, it also is that Atari kind of plays it smart through all of this. So them backing out of this might have been like the smartest decision they make in this whole process right here, because, you know, as you'll see, Atari kind of winds up coming out as sort of the victors in all of this.
Yeah.
So, but on top of this whole, you know, lawsuit stuff that's kind of like predating this buildup, we start getting into like some of the later stuff here, which is like how the crash here was different from the other crash that's to come. Since, you know, Atari had Pong that had become like insanely popular, and there's all these clones, and I believe the quote there was like, there was something somewhere talking about how Atari literally was just like licensing anybody who wanted to make Pong could, and it became it was so popular, and it was cloned until the market could no longer hold any more cloned consoles, and it was like a dividing line to show the end of like the first generation. And I think, Michael, you had something about how, like, you know, with technology and all of this.
Yeah. So I think it's important to put the developments within the video game industry kind of back into the larger context that is the home electronics industry at this point. One of the reasons that the video game industry is able to kind of explode so much, such that all of these clones and all of these other game manufacturers are finding ways into the industry, is because of how rapidly things like the handheld electronic and the home electronics market are developing in this time. I've got a couple of quotes here. So there's a video game historian and scholar by the name of Mark J.P. Wolf, who has a very interesting article about kind of the history of this crash. And he puts it in the context of the calculator market. So looking at the calculator market, for example, there's an article in the October 9th, 1971 issue of Business Week that mentions, quote, "Just 3 years ago, it was unfeasible to make a battery-powered calculator designed to fit in the operator's hand. The first pocket calculator, which was made in Japan, did not appear until 1969, requiring dozens of integrated circuits. It was bulky as a large paperback book and was priced at a hefty $400. But late last month, Bomar Instrument Corp of Fort Wayne Industries began shipping the first of its new cigarette pack-sized calculators. They're made entirely in the US with the TI chip at $240 and are the lowest priced and smallest portables on the market." So in the span of 2 years, the calculator market advances from making calculators that are about the size of small paperback books and costing $400 to cigarette pack sized calculators that are at $240, so $160 less. And that's $160 in 1971.
Yeah.
So the industry, electronics are expanding very rapidly at this time. And this is something that Mark Wolf mentions kind of catches developers off guard. It demonstrated, and this is a quote from Mark Wolf, demonstrated how unbridled enthusiasm within the industry would not necessarily be followed by consumers who are becoming more careful and looking ahead to what new technology was on the horizon rather than adopting every new system in advance as it appeared. Continuing miniaturization and the rapidly dropping prices of calculators and other electronics industry products led many to expect that further technological advances would happen, making them seem less impressive or at least surprising, or at least less surprising.
Yeah.
Which is to say, you know, as game manufacturers were quick to kind of jump on the ship of technology becoming more available and it being easier to get into the games market, consumers were starting to become a little bit more wary. You know, do I buy this new console that just came out, or do I just wait a year? And, you know, there's going to be a much more advanced console already coming out next year for half the price. You know, it's like in a modern day context, you might think, if you're a PC gamer, you know, do I skip this generation of graphics cards and just wait for the next one because my current graphics card runs everything fine anyway? You know, or do I buy in, right? But I don't think, personally, I mean, this is just me. I'm not buying every single new generation of NVIDIA card that comes out. I think I'm still running something that's the equivalent of a 2700.
Yeah. Well, like even with like just regular consumers, think about like how the TV market goes. Like 1080p was like the whole big deal, and then suddenly 4K TVs came out, and when 4K TVs first came out, people weren't really buying them,
right?
And they were like stupid expensive. And now 4K TVs have reached a reasonable market price that people feel like they can buy them.
Yeah.
So it's the market trend of like, I can see where in the 70s where like new technology, because of how fresh it is, like turns into this craze where you're just buying it up. And then once people start realizing that, we had these same thing almost came out like 2 months apart and they're practically no different from one another, they start getting a little more hesitant.
Yeah, definitely. So within the context of the video game industry, and I believe that we mentioned this perhaps in our third episode, but one of the main catalysts for what Mark Wolf calls to be this onslaught of new systems is the AY3-8500 chip produced by General Instruments in early 1976. Mark quotes a Pong historian by the name of David Winter as saying, quote, "A complete video game system could be built with this chip and a few additional components. Since the chip was available to every manufacturer at a low cost, it was no longer necessary to design a whole and expensive electronic circuit. This drastically changed the video game industry. Between 1976 and 1977, hundreds of manufacturers released their video game systems all over the world, and other chips appeared, some with color graphics, some with more games, and so on. The period of early video game history was over, and the market was open to everybody." So there was basically a massive gold rush of basically every company that had even a tangential interest in electronics was now thinking, holy crap, I got to get in on the money in this video game industry. Mm-hmm. Because the speculation surrounding the video game industry at this point was, in retrospect, frankly ridiculous. Mark Wolf cites a article from the 1977 Chicago Tribune saying that there's every reason to believe the boom is only beginning. Video games sales in 1976 totaled an estimated 3.5 million units, which is 10 times the 1975 figures. And they are expected to double and redouble within the next 2 years and should top 16 million annually by 1980. It's no wonder that the makers of these teletronic competitions exuded nothing but gleeful optimism last January during the Consumer Electronics Show at the Conrad Hilton Hotel. The article lists 22 systems produced by 14 different companies, and over half the systems listed already featured color graphics. But it does go on to offer a little bit of a warning. It says, quote, "A brief cautionary word. Despite the variety of electronic games available, some industry observers are convinced the future lies not with limited option dedicated games, but with programmable systems that can be expanded indefinitely. Only Fairchild has such a game on the market today, but others are near. It may pay to wait. RCA, for example, will have its Studio 2 ready by mid-year. It promises 5 built-in games with 3 cartridges available initially and others to follow." So you can kind of see already how the attitude surrounding the market is changing, at least in, like an expert opinion. Already You're seeing people saying like, maybe wait until this one comes out because, it's now possible for people to make video game consoles that actually allow you to swap cartridges in and out. Like maybe that's going to become a more regular thing. It's just Fairchild right now, but maybe don't just buy the first console you see.
Do some research.
Yeah. And it's funny because in that particular quote, if you listened to our third episode where I talk about the Fairchild Channel F video entertainment system and then the Atari VCS later, it's funny because the article says only Fairchild has such a game on the market today, but others are near. And implicit within that, but others are near, looking back retrospectively, is Atari, who would ultimately go on to become the more dominant manufacturer, and their system would basically all but eclipse the Fairchild Channel F from receiving its proper, I guess, recognition within video game history.
Yeah, it's again, Atari just lurking, like, playing things smart. But like, you think about like the number you were talking about, like in like the projections, and it's like, you'd have to think, if all these people start producing all these consoles, and you have this console, what's the first thing that you want to produce for this console? Well, obviously the most popular game on the market right now is Pong. And the company that's making that game is literally just passing out patents and just like permissions for people to play, to make this game however you want. So if you're Atari, that's not a bad thing, because you can charge people for this. Like, you'd be like, yeah, sure, you can make a Pong clone. I'd have to look into it, but I'm sure that they were probably like, pay us X and we'll give you, this little right to make a Pong clone for your brand new system. And, and then this leads to Magnavox being like, we're going to sue all of you now.
Yeah.
So maybe Atari was playing some like 40 chess or something. They probably weren't, but like, it's just like, it's very coincidental.
There's speculation that Magnavox actually waited until Atari was like successful enough to be worth suing over the Pong stuff. Like, they could have done it earlier, but they actually waited until they would have gotten more money out of it.
Oh, so maybe it was Magnavox that was just playing the long game. Like, oh yeah, Atari, you just keep handing out those Pong passes and just keep quietly keeping track of these people's names.
I will mention briefly too that, and I think this will be more of a factor later on in the video game industry, especially when we talk about the later crash, the bigger crash that happens. But around this same time, 75, 76-ish, if you remember from episode 3, this is kind of when home computers start to become a viable thing for people to own. They're still quite expensive at this time. So you have like the Altair and you have the Apple II. But there's a lot of interest in hobbyists at this time in just buying computers rather than buying dedicated consoles, especially consoles that only had a couple of games built into them. As computers became a more regular thing, there were a lot of people who just preferred to own computers to play games rather than buy new consoles.
Yeah.
So that was like kind of another thing, maybe tugging at the consumer base that people expected to continue to explode the video game industry well into the early 1980s.
Yeah, you also had to think, like, video games were still seen more as like the leisure activity, as to where like owning a home computer, not only can it play games, but it can like type up documents for you. It has like multi functionality, like, to provide for people.
Yeah.
So that you can see where that would maybe eclipse the appeal for like someone that's more tech savvy to want to get a computer over buying another console.
Right. The console is more of a unitasker. It's funny actually, because in that Chicago Tribune article from 1977, in the author's section on the warning, they do mention that, quote, a programmable video unit with its ability to create virtually any imaginable kind of visual display has the potential to offer much more than just entertainment. It could be the first step toward a true home computer, useful as an instructional tool and as an information storage and retrieval device. As these applications are refined, the price of new program cartridges should drop, perhaps as much as 50%. So it's funny because, here is this analyst who kind of sees home video game consoles, especially home video game consoles that can have interchangeable cartridges like the Fairchild, which is the one that he mentions, as almost being kind of a step in this direction of the more varied and useful home computer, like kind of thing that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
a piece of equipment that you can put something in and it does a different thing.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads us into like what we're talking, where it's like, here's these people with this speculation that like we're gonna double our numbers and then we're gonna double it again, and it's like, and then in 77 when the crash occurred, like companies they had so much stock because they had so much faith that this market was just going to keep steamrolling forward, that they were forced to sell their older obsolete systems at a loss. Suddenly the market is just like flooded with all of this. Manufacturers of older obsolete consoles and Pong clones were sold at a loss to clear stock, and creating this glut in the market. Atari and Magnavox remained in the home console market despite suffering losses in 77 and 78, but many manufacturers were negatively affected, and companies started just going bankrupt left and right. So then you have Allied Leisure goes out, Fairchild, National Semiconductors, they just leave the console development. And then Magnavox had to cancel their next console. Coleco stayed in, even though they took a $30 million loss in 77. And Atari remained afloat with some helpful funding from Warner Communications. So, you see this like massive impact of suddenly this person is like, oh yeah, video games are going to double in sales in the next year, and then companies start dying left and right.
Yep.
And in North America, this drove smaller companies like out of business, but Europe had a little bit of a different impact. The reduction in demand for chips that powered the first generation consoles caused the price of those chips to drop dramatically. European manufacturers such as Hamanex, Seacam, Soundic released cartridge-based consoles that contained no CPUs. Cartridges for these consoles would contain the same chips that would later power Pong consoles. So, America saw a little bit of a harder hit than Europe, and I don't have a whole lot on like how Japan might have fared. I would figure it would kind of be the same way, where it's like little bitty companies probably would have suffered, as to where like Atari and larger companies probably still would have rose to the top. This 77 crash kind of cleared out a lot of people.
It did. It kind of, it set the stage for Atari to very intelligently corner the market and become the dominant manufacturer for like the next 6 years at least.
Yeah, it was like this was almost like kind of a hard reset button right here.
Yeah.
So the crash would eventually come to an end in 78 when Taito released a game known as Space Invaders. This would spark a renaissance in the video game industry and pave the way for the golden age of arcade video games. Soon after, Space Invaders would be licensed by the Atari VCS, later known as the 2600, and become its first big hit and quadrupling the console's sales. This helped Atari recover from their early losses, and the success of the 2600 in turn revived the home video game market up until the point that it's going to crash again. In a short amount of time.
The way that Mark Wolf describes it is that Fairchild and RCA had cartridge-based systems out before Atari did, and this spurred Atari into releasing their system before the market was flooded again. So basically, when the crash happened, Atari was paying attention, and I suppose when they kind of sensed that the crash was bottoming out, they released the VCS. The Atari VCS appeared in October and sold for $189.95, which, how much did you say that would be?
That's almost like $1,000 in today's terms.
Crazy.
It was like 900 and something, like you account for like inflation and everything. Like $180 then would have been like 90 something. Like I think it was like 90.26 or something like that. It was just like ridiculous. Like they basically were just selling this thing for the price of a brand new computer.
Yeah, I mean, like if I wanted to build a new gaming rig today, like $900 even, I think would be, in the range of maybe like a budget computer,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that they're Atari bust up onto the scene with this brand new game that is really popular in the arcades that they now have a license for. And Space Invaders kind of holds this like interesting little place in history of like it kind of was the game after Pong.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because at this time, while Atari emerges the clear victor, Fairchild and RCA don't just give up. Fairchild actually, after being bought out by Zircon International, tried unsuccessfully to make a comeback with its Channel F System 2 in 1979, which did not do that great. But I think one of the reasons that Atari saw a lot of success, so in direct comparisons between the Atari VCS and the Fairchild Channel F video entertainment system, one of the things that I believe historians point to as being one of the deciding factors as to why the Atari system was more attractive to consumers at the time is that, quite simply, there were more game cartridges available for the Atari and they were cheaper.
Right.
And this is due in part because Atari was one of the first manufacturers to allow third-party developers to make game cartridges for their console. Mark Wolf, I'll quote him again. The fact that Atari allowed third-party developers to make games for its systems encouraged the startup of many small game companies, some of which, like Activision and Imagic, were begun by disgruntled former employees of Atari. The third-party game development and production, eventually resulting in over 1,000 different cartridges made for the system, would also keep the Atari 2600 in production until its official retirement in 1992, making it one of the most successful consoles in video game history.
Wow.
So that was like one of the big reasons is like, you know, you look at the 2600 and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, as like a young kid at the time or just a hobbyist, this console has like 1,000 games. And then the Fairchild Channel F, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe they've got 100 cartridges and they're twice as expensive. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would probably want to buy the console that I knew had more games. I mean, even though it would probably be hard to find a catalog exactly of what all the available games were at the time.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if they took some lessons from like everything before the crash where they were just handing out Pong licenses and they were just like, what if we just hand out license to make games, but we limit it to just our system? You know, that would probably be a way to cut down on people developing other consoles, and this way they're kind of like, and even from like a developer standpoint, it's like, well, we saw what happened when people try to make too many consoles. What if we just make games? Yes, it's almost like there's this interesting shift in philosophy there.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, I guess, the contemporary game industry where it's like nobody really tries to make consoles anymore except for the established names. If you're if you're somebody looking to break into the video game industry in 2023, I mean, it almost goes without saying that what you would do is make a video game.
Yeah. Rather
than make a thing that can play video games, you know, because I don't know, the Ouya and the Soulja Boy game console, I don't think did very well.
Well, or even look at like Google with Stadia, like,
yeah,
you know, we've had a couple of like false starts with dedicated consoles outside of the main three now. Four if you count like all the PCs, you know, the PC distribution. So
yeah, I think that Google was on the money with, like, I think something like Stadia will eventually become viable and popular. I think the problem with Stadia was primarily just how aggressively bad the monetization was.
Yeah. Like,
you had to buy it like it was a real console. Like, I think on release, you could just buy a license for it that gave you a lifetime access to it that was like $270 or something.
Oh, wow.
And then you also had to buy the games on top of that. So there was little incentive to do that over just having a console, I feel like.
Yeah, and also I don't think internet was up to speeds to be able to really push for cloud gaming at the time. Yeah, there's like just a technological hindrance there as well.
But I do think, I mean, as internet speeds become faster, and I think as I think eventually, there's going to be like a Netflix. Maybe you remember GameFly. That was kind of like Netflix back when they used to mail you DVDs in the mail.
Yeah.
But I think eventually, right, there's going to be, like Microsoft has Game Pass. You do still have to download the games for that. But I'm thinking like you subscribe for $15 a month and you get access to games that you can stream to your PC. But who knows?
Yeah. So I guess this like leads us into our next is like what are some of the things that like I guess gaming today could learn from the crash of 77, because we obviously know that all the lessons weren't really picked up then, because a few years later we have the more prominent crash. But I guess we were talking about it earlier when we were looking over the notes. It's like I guess the 77 crash is like the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah,
where it's like here's this kind of pre-warning to developers and people in the video game industry, like, hey, this thing can teeter like real quick, and yet they still kind of things still kind of happen. And now don't take this as like verbatim as the next crash happens almost verbatim. It is, the next crash is a whole nother like thing, which we are definitely dedicating an episode to.
Yeah.
But yeah.
As far as lessons, I mean, I guess that, there's I guess, standard economic lessons that maybe you would expect, which is that, don't confuse optimism and a desire to make money with, long-term financial prospects or even short-term financial prospects. I mean, there was a lot of hype surrounding the video game industry, but I do think that it seems clear to me that there were signs. It's easy to say this retrospectively,
right?
But it does seem like there were signs that indicated that the growth of the video game industry in like 75 and 76 was like a bubble, and that it was not really a sustainable thing, especially as new technology was advancing as rapidly as it was. Mm-hmm. So, maybe I go back in time and I warn Google to not invest in Stadia, but also I think that there's an interesting, I think about when I was a kid, I remember pre-order bonuses like really becoming a big thing. There was like a moment in time where I was like, if you pre-order Halo ODST, you get to play as Sergeant Johnson in firefight mode.
Yeah.
And kind of all at once, I feel like a lot of developers for Call of Duty and Halo and a ton of games were just starting to do pre-order bonuses, to the point where it's like there were even retailer specific pre-order bonuses, like if you got something at Best Buy, you'd get something different than if you pre-ordered at GameStop.
Yeah.
And I remember it just being like a normal thing for a while that I would just pre-order games, and I just I had no concept of, what if I spend $60 on a game and it's bad? It's like, well, too late. You pre-ordered it already and you got it. Like, I know it's more reasonable now for people to just be like, don't pre-order games. Like, wait for the reviews to come out. Like, it's fine. You don't need to be the first one to play the game. You can wait a little bit. I promise it won't kill you.
Yeah, that's for me, like, the moment where I stopped pre-ordering games was when the shit from One Man's Sky happened.
No Man's Sky, yeah.
I was so excited about that game. My roommate was too. We got it, and we were like, oh, okay. And even today, by today's standards, I am so cautious about like buying games around release. Like, if they don't have an embargo lift like at least 2 days before the game comes out with some good reviews, I am super skeptical.
Yeah. And it's funny though, because it's like, one of the reasons that the crash happens, as we kind of went over, is because gamers, or I guess consumers, were becoming a little bit more cautious about how they spend their money. I mean, I suppose there must be waves as far as generations are concerned, because, younger kids are going to grow up and they're not going to be as cautious. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, the whole pre-order fiasco finally kind of came to a head with like Mass Effect Andromeda. And I like to imagine that we've kind of gotten to a point now where like I don't see that many pre-order bonuses for a lot of games anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, Starfield, apparently if you pre-order it, you get to play the game early. MK1, if you pre-order
like the trend now though is like buy the game and get in early. Yeah.
What is it? I think Mortal Kombat 1, if you pre-order like the premium deluxe edition, you get access to the game like 5 days early or something like that, which by the way is so obnoxious. But it's a thing if you want to spend like an extra $50 on the game or whatever.
And or even like, and see, I don't mind stuff that's like with like pre-orders, it's like cosmetics. Like I don't really care. Like if someone really, really, really wants to support this franchise, yeah, go for it. And you know, that's kind of my feelings with just general with microtransactions as a whole, which I'm sure one day we're going to get into an episode where we just like take the bat to microtransactions.
Yeah. But I feel like, I don't know. I mean, what are some examples of AAA games like tanking because people like waited? I mean, so Mass Effect Andromeda, maybe you remember, the game sold ridiculously well. It like went gold or platinum or whatever before it even came out. And then it came out and the game was messy and ugly and, I mean, borderline unfinished. And BioWare, and you know, by this I kind of probably mean EA, pulled the plug on further support for the game. They basically said, we made our money. We're going to do like one patch to do some bug fixes and fix the facial animations, and then we're out. So the game never got any DLC because there was no incentive to.
It's kind of strange too. Like, I mean, think about like, I know I made the example of talking about like No Man's Sky, but like since then, No Man's Sky has legitimately like fixed things, added stuff, and has really survived post-launch and fiasco.
Yeah.
You know,
they've genuinely turned it into a great game now.
Yeah. I mean, Cyberpunk was kind of the same way.
Yeah, Cyberpunk is also a game that I was thinking about. I mean, and maybe this like speaks to my own frustratedness with how gaming developers keep getting away with this. I refused to believe that CD Projekt Red could mess up Cyberpunk as bad as they did on release. I mean, I was such a huge fan of The Witcher, like all three of the games. In retrospect, it seems, I mean, I do think there were hints that like maybe people were just blind to in retrospect that Cyberpunk was like in trouble.
Yeah.
Weird details like Keanu Reeves only being hired in 2018. But also saying that he was like working closely with the writers of the game to develop the character of Johnny Silverhand, who the writers were also saying was an integral part of the story, and who, you know, like Keanu Reeves was like always going to be playing him. I just feel like there was moments where I'm like, what, hasn't this game been in development for 4 or 5 or 6 years at this point, and you're just now within the last year starting things that seem to be integral to the main story?
It kind of makes me think about like how we were talking about like, you know, this guy in this article wrote the gaming's going to double and then double again, where it's like you start believing so much in a hype that it gets out of control. And you know, Cyberpunk was kind of the same way for me. Like there was all this hype and it was so big, and then it happened and there was a mess, you know. And I'm wondering if that was kind of like we were talking about, like, and you look at like how the gaming industry was back then, is it was primarily targeted towards adults. And what kind of changes with the 80s in like a philosophy terms is video games kind of stopped targeting adults. They aim to like a younger crowd, which granted, you know, arcades were generally aimed at a younger crowd to begin with. So there's almost like, it's kind of weird for me to read a statement that says that like video games were targeted towards adults, and part of the crash might have also been changed to where people viewed games as leisure and start shifting their they're start shifting towards home computers.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if marketing approach post like in mid 80s changed the philosophy of how the video games were able to sustain themselves versus like here in the 70s where they're like, we're going all in on this entertainment thing and we're aiming towards this like certain market, hoping that knowing that we've sold so much this year, we believe that we can do even better because people are just buying these things like gangbusters.
Yeah.
And then they were wrong.
Well, perhaps children are less discerning consumers. It's easier to peddle junk to a bunch of kids who, don't know that they shouldn't pre-order games or wait for the next big thing,
or invest in motion controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think about like the Kinect and just how horrible that was received.
Yes.
Especially when Microsoft was like, you have to use Kinect to sign on to get into your Xbox.
Yeah.
So
one of many gimmicks that Microsoft paid for.
Or think like here's another one that's kind of interesting to think about in terms of just like lessons that could probably be pulled to this is like, think about Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
Like it's like what we talked about last week when we were talking about gaming preservation, where it's like these people go so hard on these like peripherals, and then when the game reaches its like end and they keep trying to push this stuff, people will just kind of give up on it.
Yeah.
They're tired of buying the same guitar controller like 3 times.
Yeah. They yeah, I mean, just they'll oversaturate whatever the flavor of the month thing is. I mean, like you only need to look at the industry today. I mean, how many, or even like a couple of years ago, how many early access open world survival multiplayer online games were on Steam at one point?
Oh, tons.
DayZ, Rust, 7 Days to Die.
Even
Ark came out of that, I think.
Even the Battle Royale boom.
Yeah, Battle Royales now, MOBAs a while back, MMOs in the 2000s. Everyone wanted to be the WoW killer for like a whole decade until they kind of realized that WoW had to run its course before people were interested in playing other things.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like we have like little versions of the same kind of crash. It's just they're not as broadly affecting anymore. Like the entire industry is so stable now that it can survive, but like these little trends are kind of like more micro versions of crashes.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. Like, why would you release a battle royale when like Fortnite's the it game?
Right. What's funny is like Fortnite wasn't even the it battle royale at first.
It was like PUBG, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was The Calling, or what? There was a game on. Was it The Calling?
Maybe.
I'm trying to remind myself. There was no. There was some game on Steam that was a battle royale. There was also like what is it, like DayZ King of the Hill or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Which DayZ was just a mod for Arma.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think PUBG was the first major hit.
Mm-hmm.
And then following up PUBG, I think Epic Games. So I remember when Fortnite first came out, a lot of people forget this. Fortnite wasn't actually a battle royale. Fortnite was a multiplayer open world crafting survival game.
Yeah, it was like a horde mode kind of game, wasn't it?
Yeah. You paid $40 for the game. And basically what it allowed you to do was join a world with your friends in which you would harvest resources. And you had to build increasingly sturdy forts to defend against basically waves of zombies that would come in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. They only released a free-to-play battle royale mode after the fact, and that ended up just being what was more popular, and now it's dominating the world. But it's crazy to me when I still see developers making new battle royales. Like, I keep getting ads for new battle royale games, and I just genuinely think to myself, like, there's no possible way these developers can be making this thinking that they're going to have a successful game. Right. I just don't see a new battle royale. You know, like, think about the MOBAs. Like, MOBAs kind of ran their course. There was League of Legends, there was Dota 2. I guess, you know, Heroes of New Earth for a while, but that quickly got eclipsed by Dota 2 and maybe like Smite to a lesser extent.
There was also Heroes of the Storm.
Yeah, Heroes of the Storm. I guess that's fair. Heroes of the Storm may be like one weird example, but yeah, I feel like Heroes of the Storm has kind of died out at this point, which is sad because I did think it was quite good.
Yeah.
But it's like nobody's making new MOBAs anymore, and nobody ever made a MOBA that really kind of challenged the supremacy of League of Legends and Dota 2. And I think League of Legends and Dota 2 are still consistently like two gigantic games.
I mean, I think League just released their first released a new character.
Yeah, League is, who knows what League is doing. I mean,
Riot's just getting super big at this point.
Yeah,
like, they've made an animated show. They've got a fighting game coming out.
Yeah, but it's like, why, you know, nobody in their right mind would try and break into the MOBA industry at this point.
Yeah.
And so I think it's odd to me when developers kind of just like ignore. Maybe it's just the fact that developers are just not often gamers themselves, or maybe they're being controlled, or not controlled, but they're being driven by people who don't play video games.
Right.
And are not paying attention to media in the industry, you know, such that people just make bombs because they think that they have a chance at making the next big game or whatever.
Maybe that's what it just needs, is a genre to have its own micro version of a Crash of 77 to really like reset things.
Yeah.
Someone just starts releasing just multiple clones of Fortnite just unabashedly.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's, you know, like, if a game is good now, I think eventually, because of how plugged in everyone is, because the internet exists, because of media, a game that comes out and is good, people will eventually discover and play.
Right.
I feel like the big risk now is, you know, companies who dump hundreds of millions, I mean billions of dollars. I have no concept of how expensive some of these AAA games are. And then they end up being bad, and then they lose a ton of money. Like, I'm thinking like Anthem, you know?
Oh, yeah.
People were so burned by Mass Effect Andromeda that despite the insane amount of publicity and marketing and rollout that EA and BioWare were doing for Anthem, I'm pretty sure the game tanked pretty badly.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, pre-orders aren't going to save you from releasing a shitty game this time. I mean, you just...
Yeah, I'm fairly certain
trained us to not trust you.
I'm fairly certain that game arrived dead.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think, I don't know, the takeaway for consumers is don't pre-order games, and I guess the takeaway for devs is don't just rely on consumers as being a static, like, monolithic body of people who will just buy whatever you push out if it sounds cool.
Yeah, don't assume that you're going to double and then double again.
Right. It's like, after getting burned by CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk 2077, I really don't trust any developers now. And so it's like I shouldn't have been pre-ordering games around Cyberpunk 2077 anyway, but I did. And now it's like I won't even pre-order FromSoft games anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's and I trust FromSoft. I say this, maybe this won't age well. I don't think FromSoft can make a bad game, but why risk it?
Yeah.
Make good games. Don't rely on a marketing campaign to make you rich before the game has even come out. Just make good video games, and and then you'll have a runaway hit like a Baldur's Gate 3, who nobody expected to be as insanely good as it is.
Yeah, and it seems like right now Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be a really good line in the sand kind of thing. Here's what it could be. And it's like what we were talking, you look at all, it's just like we were saying, consumer trends. we have paid attention to the market, and now people start acting, and companies start to take hits from it. You look at a lot of like random indie devs who just kind of like fall away, or games that die because maybe they're a little too much like one thing or the other. So, but it's just weird that things tend to repeat.
Yeah, and probably will. I mean, as
it is.
There are new grifts for gaming. I mean, like loot boxes, right? It's like people are always going to find different ways to trick kids into buying things that are not worth it.
Yeah. All right. So any final thoughts on the crash in 77?
I think we covered it pretty substantially, and then speculated on its significance for the larger industry.
Yeah. All right. Well, we want to thanks folks again for keep listening to us, as we've now reached our original goal of the 5th episode, and I don't know what our next goal is. Probably survive to the beginning of next year. But next month being October, we feel as though it's kind of obligated to do something kind of spooky. And so we're gonna talk about an interesting topic. We were originally going to talk about one thing, and then the more I got to thinking about it, I was like, what if we kind of talk about like a whole area? And our next episode is gonna be talking about horror games and like how the environment themselves influence like horror games or make games spooky, which I know Michael's excited about. I am as well. So tune in next month, and then our November episode, before we get out of the 70s, we're going to backtrack a little bit and talk about mainframe gaming and how that kind of influenced things as we leave the 70s finally. And then our December episode will be our obligatory awards month episode.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So Michael's just going to keep picking Baldur's Gate 3 for every single one of the categories.
It's definitely. What else? What else can contest with Baldur's Gate 3 at this point for Game of the Year? I mean, like Tears of the Kingdom, sure, right? Glorified expansion for Breath of the Wild. Don't shoot me.
Oh, God. They're going to come for us now.
And they're going to come for me. I'm going to get canceled.
Yeah. Well, and on that, we can tell where people can find you to yell at you, Michael.
Yeah, I believe, if nothing else has changed, I'm on Instagram at mackerel_prawns. I'm on X now, is what it's called.
Yeah, they finally changed it.
They finally changed it to X. I believe it's also just macro prawns, though I don't really use it. And I was thinking about even deleting it just because I hate Elon Musk. So,
and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at PressArtF4. I'm also on the Cajun Greatness Show. It's still currently on a little bit of a hiatus. We got some stuff going on. And you can check us out and find older episodes on our Linktree website, which is tr.ee/the Instruction Booklet. We're also on it's instruction_BK on X. I only post the episodes. I rarely do anything else on there. And we're also always happy to be a part of this AOSCH Extra. They're nice enough to let us, linger and philosophize about things. You can find them on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. It's and then they're also on X at AOSCH Extra, and they also have an Instagram account. So thank you again for tuning in and listening to us talk about video game history stuff, and get ready for next month as we talk about some spooky stuff. But other than that, y'all have a great rest of your day. See ya.